Hi everyone, welcome to day 5. So this is our 5th video in our 14 video series looking at an introduction to satellite Earth observation. Now in the last few videos we've been building up this workflow. We've been looking at this area in Manhattan, including Central Park. And we added an index, a normalized difference vegetation index. We've aggregated the data. We're displaying two layers on our map here, the NDVI, so the normalized difference vegetation index, and a false color image that just uses the near infrared and the red. In this video, we want to look a little bit more about how we can change the display and how we can vary the scale and the legend of what we're displaying in the data here. So I'm going to get rid of this one that's the multiple bands, the false color image, and we're just going to look at the NDVI. So that's just one channel. Now, it's this cog on the add map layer that gives us the ability to change things. We have a whole set of contrast options. So what we can look at is you can look at the minimum and the maximum of the data set. You can go to the default. So there's always a default data visualization that gets you started. And there's always a min-max. We also have plus or minus 1 standard deviation or 2 standard deviations. So that looks at the histogram of the data and decides how to scale it based on the range. So whether it's 1 or 2 standard deviations. Or we've also got the 90th percentile and the 98th percentile. So it's all of these 4 approaches are looking at the histogram and then either taking a wider or narrower look at the histogram data and stretching that to display it on the map. The final one is the custom one where you can change to do any range you want. Now, because we're looking at NDVI, because it's normalized, only ever goes from -1 to 1. So we can, as is displayed here, just leave it to go to, well, in this case, it's going from -32 to plus 0.86 because it was the 98th percentile. If we actually go to the maximum and minimum and run that, you'll notice that the scale and the legend will change slightly. I would expect it to be a little bit wider. So in this case, it's down to 0.39 and 0.89, quite similar at the top ends. You wouldn't notice visually very much difference on that change, but let's look at the custom range because we go from -1 to 1. So what we're doing now is we're forcing it to scale it between -1 and 1 because that is the minimum and maximum that we would expect of an NDVI. So it's not the minimum and maximum now of the data, it's what we expect it to vary in terms of the limits of NDVI. So we're now going from -1 to 1. Now it's still all shades of green, and the key thing about NDVI is that there's no vegetation when you get down to an NDVI of 0, and when you get to minus values of NDVI, it's more likely to be things like water. But here we've got the water is actually still looking a bit of a pale green. So that's when we might want to change the color ramp. So instead of one that's just going from a very pale yellow up to a dark green, is we might choose something like the delta, which is going from a dark blue up to a green, and it's pretty much white in the middle. Now you have to be careful if you apply these principles and these symmetric color ramps if you haven't defined what the range of values are, because your max and min might be different for different parts of the Earth's surface that you're looking at. But you'll notice now with this color ramp, the water actually comes out looking blue. Most of the urban area is coming out relatively white, and the vegetation is coming out with a dark green. So it's much more what we would expect to have when visualizing the kind of data that we're looking at with an NDVI. So what I suggest you do is go and look at some of the other areas, your areas of interest, and go and experiment with the different contrast values and the different color ramps to see what you can see. One thing to note is that the color ramps, almost all of the color ramps we have chosen are colorblind accessible. There's a couple of them that are very commonly used, like Jet, which are not very good for colorblind users, but we've added it in there because there are so many standard visualizations that people will use that color scheme for. But pretty much everything else in our list of color ramps is colorblind friendly. So please go and have a look at different areas of the world with the different contrasts. In the next video, we're going to look at this block here, the aggregate images over time. Take a little bit of a careful look as to what that is doing.